Hello and welcome. Today I will show you how to beat the engine 10-0 in a winning pawn endgame. Let's go. In this video, you're going to learn how to always win with an extra pawn in a pawn endgame, which is not just going to help with pawn endgames, but it's also going to help you understand why, when we're up a pawn in a middle game, why we want to trade down pieces to a pawn endgame. So we go from this to something like this, where our extra pawn is not barely visible, it's the main feature of the position, and this was what allows us to win smoothly, peacefully, and consistently. Let's get started with learning the technique. In order to learn the technique, we need to first define a few basic terms. However, if you already know about the terms of passed pawn, pawn majority, then skip ahead a little bit. I'm going to leave the timestamps in the description and on the slider. However, if you are a beginner player and you're not aware of the terms that I just mentioned, let's define them first, because they're going to be very helpful in understanding the technique. So first, what is a passed pawn? A passed pawn is a pawn which has no enemy pawns in the path of its promotion. So essentially, if I just adjust the position here, our e pawn now has no opponent's pawns in the way of its promotion. Not just directly on the file, but also any of these squares as well. So because there are no black pawns in the highlighted area, the e pawn is a passed pawn. What does that mean? This passed pawn is our best candidate as far as promotion goes. So our job from here is to essentially promote a pawn, and the easiest one to promote is a passed pawn. Now, granted, the opponent's king will try to stop us, but our king will also play a role. We're going to see that later. So that is a passed pawn. Now, in the initial position, notice that there are no passed pawns. This pawn is not passed because it gets met by the g pawn in its path to promotion. Now, that's a passed pawn, but what is a pawn majority? A pawn majority is when you have more pawns on the same side than your opponent. That's it. Why is this useful? Because a pawn majority is needed in order to create a passed pawn. Now, the next logical question is, how do we use a pawn majority in order to forcefully create a passed pawn? I'm going to move the kings out of the way to the other side of the board, just so we have the pawn situation in isolation here to explore. So let's take a look at how that would come to life. Now, which pawn do you push is the most logical question. The answer is the candidate pawn. The candidate pawn is the one without a counterpart. Why do we do this? Because if I push one of these pawns, let's say the middle pawn, the problem is that they could block me because they have one as well. And now I can't push f4 or h4 because I would just get captured. And that's it. So I have failed to create a passed pawn safely using my majority. But if I push my candidate pawn first without a counterpart, then I can never get blocked for that reason. So this guarantees that my pawn majority will be healthy and able to create a passed pawn. Let's see how this progresses. So my opponent, let's just say he plays king moves left and right. How would I go about creating a passed pawn? So we push the candidate pawn as much as we can. And now we can't go f6 because they would take us. So for that reason, now we support it with other pawns. So we bring these guys as support whenever needed. So g4, and now our threat is to push g5. Let's showcase it like this, and that would protect our f6 pawn. So when they take it, we would take back and create a passed pawn, which is the one who promotes. So that's how that works. And then after g5 being our threat, let's say black recognizes that and plays h6 to stop us. Now if we push g5, they just take it. Now comes the other support. So bring the other pawns as support whenever needed. So here, h4. And now whatever they push, we will just take. So that's not a worry. But let's say they waste the move again. Now we push g5. They could take, or they don't have to, but f6 is coming next move. Let's say they take, we take back. We go f6, takes, and this is now a passed pawn. So that was how to create a passed pawn using a pawn majority. Now let's talk about how the kings influence that, because of course they're not just going to play left and right here. They're going to try and stop your pawns from reaching the other side, and your king is there to help them. So let's see, let's bring the kings back and see how this endgame may be played in reality. So I would play f4, giving my king room to get up the board. So at first it's going to be a race of the kings, because the kings are what decide how easy it is for our pawns to push up, essentially. The further advanced your king and the closer to your pawns, the better the chance that you will push them up uncontested. So here, for example, we want to play the move king e4, getting our king further up and into the game, and they could play this to stop us and put some pressure on our pawn. However, that's not a big problem because we can just kick them away with pawn to g4. So they go somewhere back and we get a little bit more activity. But this is constantly the thing to keep in mind. Your candidate pawn goes first. That's a way you can almost never mess it up. So let's take a look at how this works. Let's say they play a pawn move or two, doesn't matter. And again, get all your pawns there. Why not? So let's say they play, even if they try to stop you with g6, that's defended well enough. So their king aims to stop your pawns. Your king aims to help them go through anyway. And we always push the candidate pawn first. And now, if they take us, we take back, and we have gotten our passed pawn. And as soon as you get a passed pawn, let me show you the technique here. So let's say, again, they waste the move. We could just stick around, left and right, and they're going to run out of these moves on the side with pawns, meaning that at some point they have to go back with the king. Once they do, we get further up. So that's how you make slow and steady progress with your pawn. So leveraging the passed pawn in order to get king activity. And let's see what that gives us later. So let's say they run out of pawn moves here. Let's just say we block them. Maybe they run out of pawn moves here as well. So at some point they just have to bring the king back. And now once they do, your king gets access to other pawns. Now, as a result of them playing h5, they helped us a little bit. So let's say that's not a thing, just to illustrate how this goes. So we get king activity over and over and over again. And there's nothing they could do because they can't just stay here. They have to play a move. And once they go back, we get further in. Let's say like this, 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 this. And now, once you're at the final rank, this is where you have to be careful. And this, now we come to the actual, what's the winning blow? There are two things to know. One way to win is to stalemate their king and then utilize the fact that they have to give you the pawns and then you can promote while their king is stalemated. That's a little bit risky though, so beware. But the second, easier way to win this is to use your extra pawn as a decoy, as like a decoy sacrifice to take their other pawns. So for example, one winning technique would be to go to the other side here and just take these guys and promote the b pawn, for example. Now in this particular position, because the h pawns are still on the board, once that happens, this becomes like a race. So this is very risky and you have to really calculate before you do something like this. You can't just play it at first. So let's say like this, and this would be a race, and maybe you'll promote at the same time here. So for that reason, you have to be very careful about how you do this. So sometimes one technique is better, sometimes the other, depending on the situation on the board. So if there's pawns here, then this is a little bit risky, but if these guys have been traded off as a result of earlier pawn play, let's take a look. So if at some point, instead of g6, after, for example, if they had played h6 instead, then we go f5, they play something, king f4 here, g5, take, like this. And now we have a passed pawn. They have no pawns on the h file. Now this is not going to be a race. This is going to be a very clean victory for white. So we can maximize our king at first, and then we just abandon the pawn in order to go to the other side and win these guys and promote 2 versus nothing. So one small detail about that is to increase the effect of the diversion by maximizing the distance of these. Now that sounds very, advanced, but what I said is instead of giving up the pawn here in this position, like this, they could take it immediately and then run to the other side to chase our king. And this would also be a win, but a little bit more of a difficult win, requiring calculation. So for that reason, instead of leaving the pawn when the pawn is attacked, you could utilize a few extra moves to achieve this scenario. So the further apart the enemy king and our pawn are, the better the diversionary sacrifice. Because the essence of this is what? We're going to the other side to pick them up, and they have to pick up the pawn and only then start running. So they're going to be a little bit late. And of course, the more moves it takes them to pick up the pawn, the later they will come to the other side. So for example, if this pawn was way down here, then they would have to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves to take that, and only then come back to help out, by which time we'll already take all of these pawns. So for that reason, that's how we say it, maximize the distance between the enemy king and the pawn to ensure they have to take multiple moves in order to take it, so that they are even later to the party on the other side. So we use this as a decoy sacrifice. Here, 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 and we just pick up the pawns on the other side. And now their king is too late to protect the remaining one. Even if it was somewhere here, that would still be a victory, but a bit of a harder one. This is a little bit easier. And now, how do you win this one? You essentially just get your king up. That's the number one thing in pawn endgames, because the king is the one who supports the pawn's squares as they move up. So let's say this, we push the pawn a little bit. And then the pawn endgame concept that you must know at the end is called opposition. Essentially, it's when you oppose the kings one another like this. So the kings oppose each other one square between them. You are the one who wants to have opposition, which means to not move in this position. Whoever has to move, the result doesn't go their way. I'm going to make a full video on this later, but just right now, for the sake of the explanation, if they go to the left, we go up and to the right. If they go right, we go up and to the left. And this allows us to cover all of the promotion squares, and our pawn safely pre-moves into a queen. I want to put a small recap to everything, just to make it a bit clear. So we have our pawn majority on one side, and we have equality on the other side. When that's the case, your job is to first create a passed pawn, and once you do, then you leverage that passed pawn to get king activity. And once your king is super active and theirs is not very active, then you can just abandon your pawn in order to take the other ones and win the game. So let's see how that looks one more time. So after f4, let's say king f7, king f2, we activate the king. Don't forget about that. They could try to block you temporarily, but you could just kick them away. That's fine. Let's say king e4. And they might use their pawns to stop you, but if you play accurately, you will always create a passed pawn. So let's say they play g6. We play, let's say, h4, they play h6, and now pushing the candidate pawn first ensures that you can never get blocked. So let's go f5, they could take, they don't have to. Let's say they play another move instead, then we take them, doesn't matter. We still have a healthy majority, that's all we care about. So we get here with the king to be able to trade off the last one for one to create a passed pawn. So again, they played nothing, we go g5, takes, and now we use our passed pawn once we recreated it to get more king activity. So we push a little bit further up. And at some point, earlier or later, you can just abandon your pawn to go and take the other ones. So let's see what that looks like. So they have to take our pawn and only then they start running back. But now it's too late because we take both these pawns. Even if they try to defend themselves temporarily, there's no way to keep them for long. And once you have two pawns, there's multiple ways to win, but this is how you win these types of endgames. Let's see how this is different if we have an isolated pawn, which is simultaneously passed. So instead of pawn majority, at which point we have to create a passed pawn, you already have one. So this makes it slightly easier because you have to do less work. Essentially, the technique is the same. You use your passed pawn together with the king to leverage more and more king activity. So after e4, king f7, let's say how I would play this out. And now they have blocked us and we don't have a pawn to dislodge them. No worries, we just stick around. The thing is that you can always play left and right and just wait for them to have to go back, while they cannot do the same. They can't play left and right. So for that reason, we just chill and wait for them to go back. Once they do, we go forward. So of course they have a lot of pawn moves, but those will run out sooner or later. So let's say they play some sort of h5, I would just ignore them. Sooner or later they will run out. And these pawns coming closer to me doesn't make me panic or anything. They're never going to go through my pawns. So I would just go left and right until they run out. Sooner or later. If at any point black decides to go to the side like this instead of going back, that's just even easier because now I can go to the side of my pawn and the pawn and the king create this nice little barrier, ensuring that my pawn can just make a run for it. So for example, after let's say g4, I would just push my passed pawn immediately. Again, this 2 versus 2 can never forcefully create a passed pawn unless you allow it. So for example, if they go g3, taking here would be very risky because of king takes, and now they would take this pawn and promote their own. But if they go g3, I just go h3. I don't care. So they push one, I push the other. And that's it. Same thing here. They push one, I push the other. And this one will win the game. Even if they try to stop it, my king is on the side. And they could go around like this, doesn't matter. My king can cover all of the promotion squares. So that's what happens if they try to go to the side like this and go aggressive, they just lose even faster. So for that reason, they have to, after running out of pawn moves, go back, allowing my king to get further up. And here comes the point of why I wasn't scared of this. Now it's even closer for my king. If these pawns were back here, I would have a much tougher time. But now, since these pawns are so close, I could easily pick them off. Let's say g3, maybe I just take, and now I have 2 extra pawns. So I push one and then the other, or I just abandon them in order to pick up these. There's multiple winning techniques from here. So for that reason, once the opponent pushes up pawns, like this, that just makes it easier for you. So let's say they don't. Let's say they respect our technique and just go back with the king. We just make further progress with the king like this, and they have to keep going back. And at some point, once we get enough king activity, let's say they go here. Once your king is all the way up as a result of this, then you could just go and pick a side, whichever one is easier at the time, in order to promote your pawns. You can even push your pawns to make that faster. Once you take them, your pawns will be somewhere here, so promotion is even faster. But you could just do it immediately as well. Both are completely fine. So you give up your extra pawn because your king is now much better as a result of it. And you just pick all of this up, and you have multiple pawns to promote. Of course, always help out with your king. Your king is the main actor. At the start of the video, we quickly looked at this position because we said when you're in a middle game, up a pawn, your ideal scenario is to trade everything as much as possible. So here, let's say they play knight b3, trade massively. Queen for queen, fork this to trade that. Let's say take. So get as close as you can to a pawn endgame, because essentially if you remove all of these pieces, you will reach something like this, let's say, where your extra pawn matters more than anything. So here, let's say we take just to avoid any complications. What is the winning technique here? You can use what we learned now, but with a defended pass pawn, it's even easier. Why? Because your opponent can never make a run with the king to the other side or something like this, because constantly they have to worry about this pawn making a run. So their king has to basically babysit this pawn, allowing our king to just walk over to the a pawn and take it. So the technique is simply walk over to the a pawn and take it and promote the b pawn. If they try to stop you using their king, that's okay, because we just make slow and steady progress until we maximize our position, and then we just use this guy as a decoy. So use your extra pawn to divert the opponent's king from the party. So here they have to come and help out against the passed pawn sooner or later. Let's say here king c2, and now we have successfully diverted the king away from the a pawn, allowing us to promote the b pawn and win the game smoothly. And hopefully this all makes sense, but it's a little bit different if everything is on one side. This is a winning endgame, but the technique's a little bit different because now we can't go to the other side after getting our passed pawn because there is no other side here. So for that reason, your job is to maximize play with your king when everything's on one side. So let me show you what I mean by that. So at first, we always start the same way, get the king as far up the board as possible. And the only difference when everything's on one side is that the more pawns you trade, the worse it is for you. So essentially, if you get into a 1 versus 0, if these guys just get traded 2 for 2 right now magically, if it's 1 versus 0, this is actually a theoretical draw if your king is not in front of the pawn. The only way for this to be winning, 1 versus 0, is if your king is in front of the pawn. Again, separate video on that later, but just so you have a good idea. So your job is to outplay their king and create a 2 versus 1 situation, at which point you win the remaining pawn for free, or create a favorable 1 versus 0, where you can get your king in front. So that sounds very advanced, but let me put it into some moves. So we just keep on making progress. And now if black is a very good player, they're going to know to trade pawns as much as possible. And sometimes you have to trade pawns in order to progress, sometimes not. Let's take a look. So after king e7, king e5, king f6, king f7. Now, the only way forward is g5, because if you go too far to the left, maybe they could just go here and trade off multiple pawns. So g5 is our only way forward. Now after takes, 2 versus 1 is still winning. 1 versus 0, not so much. So for that reason, there's two things that can happen here. So either they push the pawn into us, trying to trade off, and if he takes us or we take him, that's a draw. But f6 is the victory, giving us a defended passed pawn. Now, this also sounds easy, but black could be very tricky here and set up a lot of tricks. If they keep track of opposition, after king to f8, if you play king f6, going for the last pawn, that's a stalemate. But this is a winning position because we give up the pawn and then pressure their king away. This is another pawn endgame concept, king pressuring, but wherever they go, we get closer. And they cannot stay guarding the pawn, so we just hang around. And once we take the pawn, this is a victory for the attacking side, no matter whose move it is. That was if they push g6. If they don't push g6, they go king e7. Then here, if you push f6, this is just a draw. King is in front of the pawn, and there's not much we could do. However, you can win with g6. And now the thing is that they have no good king moves. Let's say that they go king to d7, we would just go f6. If they take, we take back, king e8, g7, and g8 queen. If they go somewhere back, then you get up the board as well. And this is a win with very precise calculation. So after king to f8, be careful not to fall for any tricks here. The easiest win is this, 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 this. And now we don't go king f7 or king f8, that will be stalemate, but now we go f6. Point being that if they go king g8, we just push twice and promote, and checkmate. If they go here, we just go king f7 and promotion incoming. They have to push the pawn, it's not stalemate, but after king g7, here, 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 mate. Now, there's a small chance that made your entire head spin. However, what I'm trying to say is general pointers. When everything's on the same side, don't trade every pawn. Don't trade 2 for 2, because there is no other side to use this as a decoy for. So instead, our king does most of the heavy lifting. It requires a lot more calculation, and try to create a 2 versus 1 situation where you take the remaining pawn for free. Let's see one final example. So here, black's king is super advanced, so they may make a run for the other side. Not really. We just do the same technique as always. Even if they come here, we can use our king to stop them temporarily, and anytime they try to make a run here, our pawn is always faster. So we make a run with the pawn, and if they try to go this way, we just make a run. And after king f4, now there is no stopping this, and this should just be smoothly winning. So for that reason, if we go back, they have to keep going with this way of playing, of just allowing our king to get further and further up. And at some point, maybe now, maybe you push the king a little bit further back, you just abandon the pawn and you use it as a decoy, so that our king gets to the other side and smoothly promotes the f pawn. And now you're able to beat the engine 10-0 in a pawn endgame with an extra pawn. A small puzzle position as homework for you. Is this position winning for white? Is it winning for black? Is it a draw? What's going on here? We're down a pawn, but maybe it's not always about material. Drop your best solution down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe on my channel to see more stuff like this, and I'll talk to you very soon. Take it easy.